Live, everyone. Yes, live. I repeat, live. This is really happening. Refresh your browsers and everything. I'm Matt from Soundrolling.com, and I'm here starting this kind of never-ending series, I hope, of amazing sound professionals, and just asking them about their work and just trying to get everyone to kind of understand what everyone else is kind of doing, how they're kind of approaching different things, and of course the films that most of these people are working on that I'm speaking to are kind of the very top end of the kind of feature film and TV industry, which is incredibly exciting for me, and it should be for you too. So just kind of a little plug that these things will kind of be spontaneously happening in some sort of fashion as to when timing comes for both me and them. So subscribe to this YouTube channel, and yeah, don't miss out on any, as they will then be sort of broadcast as videos afterwards, which would be really cool. So I'm here with Mark Weingarten, and we're here to talk about him as a production sound mixer. Some of his credits are most recently Interstellar, Fast and Furious 7, which is now in post-production, The Hunger Games, but also some great TV series like House of Cards. Okay, so hi, Mark.
Hello. I'm Matt Price in England.
Got to make sure it's that one. So, to start off, just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you got started and what got you into sound recording.
Okay. Hi, I'm Mark Weingarten, production sound mixer. I'm in Los Angeles, California. How did I get started? Let's see. I went to film school. I wanted to be an editor. I dropped out of film school. I took an internship as an editor, picture editor, and I spent 2 years doing that, and then I was really kind of cooped up, and my friends were saying, you know, you seem to have an affinity for sound the way that you cut picture. You're very, always pre-lapping, and so they were saying maybe I should be a sound editor. So I actually found a sound editor who needed an assistant. I started working for him, and I did 3 pictures with him. One picture, the production sound was great. The next picture was terrible, and the next one it was fine. And I asked him, what happened to the sound in the middle picture? And he said, oh, the production mixer messed it up. I said, well, what does it mean to be a good production sound mixer? And he sort of explained to me what to listen for. And then I went back, and my friends were still at film school doing their final films, and I said, can I mix your films? And they said, sure, because nobody at that time in film school was interested in sound at all. So I went back and I mixed a bunch of people's final sort of thesis films. And I remember the first time I sat in a big theater and I saw someone in a close-up speaking, and it just sounded amazing coming through the speakers. I was like, oh, this is good. I want to do this. So then I went on and I became, I assisted other people. I was a boom operator for a few years. This is in New York where I grew up. And I worked as a boom operator for a while. And then some of the sound mixers I worked with were not particularly well liked, and people would always say to me, how come you're not mixing? We really like you. We'd hire you. And I said, really? Seriously, you would? So after a while, I took up one of those people on one of their offers. I'd mix like an after-school special for them. And it was really fun. And meanwhile, my friends who I'd mixed movies for at school started making movies and calling me and asking me to do their movies. And I sort of became like, I did a lot of like lower budget art movies in New York for a while. And then I was kind of stuck, because at the time they only made really big movies and really tiny movies. There was kind of nothing in between. So there was no market for me to sort of move up, because I wasn't going to get a really big movie. I didn't have the credits for that. And then somebody offered me a movie in LA, and I took it, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I came out, and I did the movie, and it went really well. The producers liked me, and they started hiring me, and I ended up doing all these movies, and that's kind of what happened.
Fantastic.
And the truth is that I really like boom operating, and had I met the right mixer that I enjoyed working with, I bet I would still be a boom operator today. So I think that's the most fun, to be honest with you.
Brilliant.
Mixing has its good points.
So you just naturally moved up and didn't stay in boom operating just because people were liking you so much for your sound mixing?
Well, just for I think my temperament and my when you're starting out, a lot of times you end up working with people who the reason that they're looking for a boom operator is because nobody else will work with them. And they're like, yeah, a new guy, he doesn't know me. So like you start out and you work with kind of not the greatest people, and which is unfortunate because it's not great training for you because they probably don't have the best work habits. But it's a way to get in because other people are like, oh, I don't want to work with that guy, forget it. So maybe that's the right person to look for if you're starting out. Somebody nobody likes. I'm not sure.
Well, then at least you get lots of work, right? So it's good.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and are you from the so you went to film school as well. How did you find, because a lot of people today, I know, sort of myself, talking from a film school kind of thing, because there wasn't so many people interested in it, there wasn't that many, excuse me, kind of resources for the sound people. They were just kind of there in the midst of everything, and everyone was already trying to be the. I think in my class of like 90, there was probably about 40 directors and probably about 49 camera people, and that was about it. So can you just talk us about your experience of film school compared to, say, doing any other sort of free projects, for instance, or lower budget projects in terms of like gaining experience?
Yeah, I mean, as far as sound goes in film school, when I was there, I only went for 2 years undergrad, and then I left to take my internship as an editor. But I wasn't actually interested in sound in film school. It wasn't my, but I noticed, especially when I went back and did my friends' films, that there was really sort of, at that time, which, and we're talking like, 35 years ago or something like that, there really wasn't much emphasis on sound and film sound at all. I have a feeling it's a lot different today. I could be wrong. And I remember one thing for me, though, was the equipment. Like we used Nagras back then, and we could always get Nagras, but we couldn't get good boom mics. So I would always make every production rent a really good boom mic, which in this case at the time was like a 416 or Sheps, but mostly back then it was like 416s and stuff. But they didn't have that. They had those Sennheiser ECMs or whatever that series that screwed on. They sounded terrible. And I was like, no, you have to get a good boom mic. And that's something I would say to anybody starting out, is you need a good boom mic. I personally favor Sheps. I use almost exclusively Sheps, but well, I shouldn't say exclusively. I use Sankins on exteriors a lot. But as a all around, you can't beat it, and it probably will work no matter what. A Sennheiser 416 is probably like if you can only have one microphone, get that one. That's what I say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And just kind of going on to kind of people looking for kind of building an equipment, obviously probably headphones are probably the easiest to start off with, getting decent headphones. For instance, have you used the same type of headphones like all the time just to get your ears kind of trained to them? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I pretty much use the Sony, the 7506s, or they used to be called V6s. I'm extremely used to them, and I say the number one reason is I know what they sound like, and they're really comfortable. Because comfort is really a genuine issue when you're wearing headphones like 12 hours a day or whatever. So, I mean, if you get a super expensive pair of headphones that don't feel comfortable, I have a feeling you're going to abandon them pretty quickly. So the 7506s, I don't know what they cost there, but like in America, they're about $100 a pair, which seems to me a reasonable price. And they're very comfortable. And they have kind of an exaggerated low end, so you have to get used to that. But you do get used to it because you hear things in the low end that you're not going to hear in dailies. And you go to dailies. That's one thing I also stress very highly is go to dailies. I always go to dailies. Now I know like more and more there aren't such things as dailies, but then watch the material at home. Get somebody to give you a DVD or whatever, or upload a file so you can watch your own work and evaluate it. And then what I also do as often as I can is I go to the mix of my movies because you can find out just what you've been doing right and what you've been doing wrong, and or maybe you're knocking yourself out to get stuff that they never use, and you're like, well, then I won't do that anymore if you're never going to use that. Or maybe they'll say, what's great, I love what you did here, but if we could have more of that, that would be great. And you're like, okay, more of that. Let's get you more of that. So I just always find it's really a learning process to go to the mix, and also it's really fun because you get to see your sound come together with the music and the sound effects, and you get to see the picture cut together, and you know, it's really cool. So I highly recommend doing that if you can. And people don't necessarily think to invite you. You sort of have to remind them that you'd like to be invited.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they think you're too busy going on to the next thing, right? It's just everyone continually on the treadmill.
Right.
No, fantastic. So in terms of, well, let's just get straight into what kind of kit you're using, for instance, just generally in terms of on Interstellar or on Fast and Furious 7.
Right.
What's kind of
I just
recorder?
Interstellar was. Sorry, you broke up, Matt.
Sorry,
what are you saying?
it was just like your main, just main recording equipment.
Okay. You're breaking up, but I think you want me to sort of talk about my equipment. Am I breaking up for you? I'm okay? Okay. So, all right. So, my main card, I have a Sonosax mixer, and I use the Zaxcom Diva recorder. I have a couple of those. I use Shep's, the CMC series microphones, predominantly indoors exclusively, I'd say. I use Electrosonics wireless with the Sanken COS lavaliers pretty much all the time. And I use a lot of times when I'm doing exteriors, I like the Sanken CS3E as my outdoor shotgun mic. But sometimes I'll use Shep's. If the environment's quiet enough, I'll use the Shep's. And if the shots are close enough, and it depends. If you shoot anamorphic, you can almost always put a mic right over somebody's head because the frame is so wide and narrow. So you can do things on exteriors where the person's really far from the camera, but the mic is still like right over their head. Whereas anyway, so it depends on also how they're shooting the movie. Interstellar was interesting. One of the things I did a lot of over-the-shoulder work on that because we went up on the glaciers and we had all the astronauts in their space helmets, and so what we did there was they spent a lot of time in pre-production with us figuring out how to mic the helmets, and we had a guy. His name is David Raymond. David was in charge of the helmets, and he is actually he's a boom operator that's worked with me, but for this movie, basically his job was the helmets, and Mike Primer was the boom operator, and then we had so in pre-production, David went in and he did all this sort of testing with the helmets and stuff, and we decided that the Sanken COS 11, which we put right on their forehead, right we had them drill a little. The helmets were very complicated, but they drilled a little place for us to put it, and they were kind of permanently mounted in there. And then we wanted to put the transmitter inside the helmet, but the helmets, they kept redesigning them, and they got so small there was no room for a transmitter in there. So what we did was we made a little pigtail kind of at the base, and then we had a little extension cable that went to a transmitter that was mostly in their arm. We put it in packs in their arm. It depended on, they had different suits for different reasons. Like on the Water Planet, they had a whole waterproof suit thing that was a different situation. But most of the time, on stage, and then when they were walking around in Iceland, and on the glacier in Iceland, because the Water Planet was also in Iceland, but when they were on the glacier, then we were able to put them in their arms because it was not waterproof. It required putting a hole in it to get it into the arm. Anyway, so we had some issues with the helmet mics keeping the levels from overdriving the radios because the space they were talking into was like this big. It was basically sealed against their face. So it was really like that much, and there was nowhere for the air pressure to go. So if they started yelling and stuff, it would just overdrive the radios like crazy. So we had the Electrosonics actually have, I believe it's a 0 setting or 0.5, like the SM transmitters. You can turn them down as low as like 0.5 or something. And we had them all on 0.5. And then after a while, I switched to I pulled out all the mics and I put in the Sanken red dot, which is it's like a 10 or 20 dB down, and that really solved it. And yet I can hear when I watch the movie as we sort of dialed in the sound in the helmets. And toward the end, when he's in the Tesseract thing, like it sounds phenomenal on that because we finally had it dialed in. And then there's like other moments where I'm like, yeah, I hear it. And we tried different mics. We tried Countryman and DPA. There's like a couple of moments in the movie where I hear it. I'm like, yeah, that's a Countryman. I didn't like that. We pulled that out right away. But you know, we didn't really have any option but to try it on screen because that's when we got to try it.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. So we went up on the glacier, and I think I had like 5 astronauts talking at the most on the glacier. I just took a Diva over my shoulder, an electrosonic venue, what's it called, field venue, put it in a backpack, and I took a little kind of camping chair with me, so that when I got to wherever we got to, I would open it up and I'd put the bag on the chair. So I didn't want to put the bag on the glacier because it's ice. So I just put it on the chair, and I would drag my little camping chair all over the place. And we had these spiky things on our shoes called crampons, so we wouldn't slide on the ice, and it was pretty insane. And we shot everything in Iceland with IMAX camera. And IMAX cameras are incredibly loud. They sound like a lawnmower, basically. But because the helmet was so isolated and the levels were so low on the mics because it's right in your face, you couldn't hear the camera at all. It was amazing. There were moments where the camera was like literally right in their face, and it was completely usable.
Wow, amazing.
And then when we got to stage, Chris Nolan is a huge proponent of the boom microphone. He does not want us to use any wireless mics at all. So, and he shoots pretty much all single cameras. So we really had kind of an ideal situation. We just put a Shaps right over somebody's head all the time. And we hardly shot any IMAX with any dialogue. I mean, he was very aware that that would trash the dialogue if they didn't have their helmets on. As long as they had their helmets on, they could do whatever they want. But as soon as the helmets came off, it was like all 35 millimeter, which is cool.
Yeah. And kind of what there's kind of questions coming in just in terms of like percentages in terms of how much of your stuff kind of makes the mix, which is kind of a common question that I guess a lot of mixers are kind of wondering about. When you kind of see a film, can you kind of tell your stuff from the ADR and things like that? I know that's not the point, but
I mean, you'll see a scene and you'll say, "Wow, I can't believe how great that scene sounds," and then you go, "Oh, I know why, because they replaced it." Because you're thinking about the environment you shot it in, you're like, it couldn't possibly sound that good. You're like, oh, I get it. But no, most of the time, I mean, I know Interstellar. I mean, there's like a whole like issues with the mix overwhelming the dialogue and all that stuff. But the truth is, the dialogue sounds great in that movie. It's like one of my best jobs because Chris Nolan insisted on shooting single camera. Everything boomed. I mean, it's just going to sound beautiful no matter what we do. And then they told me that there's 6 loop lines in the entire movie. So it's basically a 100% production track, a couple of lines here and there. And even like the robot is production. Like Chris had me put a speaker inside the robot, and Bill Irwin, who did the voice of it, was on set. We gave him a little DPA headset mic, and he would talk. I would record him and then send it out through, pre-fader out to the speaker, and the speaker's open on set, interacting with the actors. And I was saying, but I gave them an ISO track of Bill, which they could then doctor, but they chose not to. They chose just to live with the robot sounding as he sounded off the boom mic on set, which to me, I think personally, I would have preferred that they did something different, but that was the choice that they made. So, I mean, I don't think it's hateful or anything. I just think, I would have liked it to have a different sound. Maybe like a somewhat doctored kind of speakery, kind of EQ'd, robot sound. But the choice not to make it more natural.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of, I guess, creative input, in terms of being there kind of right at the start of production, are you, I mean, there's pre-production meetings, I assume, going beforehand, or are you just kind of, it's just everyone just knows that it's your task, just get us the dialogue, and we don't really care about anything else?
No, there are meetings. In the case of Interstellar, I wasn't there because I was on another project, but David, who did the helmets, was there a lot in prep. Because most of the concern on Interstellar was the helmets. That was like the big, sort of, how's this going to work? Because like on a lot of movies, like Gravity, evidently they didn't have any visor, in the helmet. They put the visor in. The glass is like CG, so they were able to just boom. They didn't have to concern themselves with making, miking the helmets. Basically, they could just put a mic there because there was no glass. So here was a case where it's like, okay, we have to figure this out. It's got to sound good. And a ton of the movie takes place with the helmets on, a lot of dialogue. We got to make sure it works. So there was multiple meetings, and then the other thing we had to work on when we got to Iceland and we really started working on the helmet stuff. Because there had been no space stuff before that. That was the first of it. There were these air packs that they had to keep. It had two purposes. It enabled them not to suffocate, and which is good, and also it kept the visors clear because they fog up really quickly because they're they're basically like this. So we had to find the right balance of airflow to keep the visors clear and keep them breathing, but not to hear the fans too much. And we had a bunch of guys there that were called the fan techs, and they really helped us out. And we kept changing fan motors and changing the speeds, and finding the right mix for everybody. And then they had some packs were for the stunt guys, and the fans were blasting, and occasionally they'd accidentally put a stunt pack on an actor, and then bring up the mic, so they go, whoa, what's going on with that guy's fan? It's like super loud. Like, oh, and we have to switch it out. And sometimes we had some problems. There was we helicoptered up to the top of a glacier to do some of the scenes with well, I shouldn't say his name because it's supposed to be a secret if you haven't seen the movie. But anyway, we go to the top of this glacier to do these scenes, and they get in this big headbutting fight there, and they crack the visors of the helmets. That's part of the deal. But we only had a certain number of helmets, and we kept breaking them, so we had to keep calling the helicopter to bring us more helmets, and wait, the helicopter come up, drop off some more helmets, take the broken ones away. They would try to fix them or whatever, and it kept going back and forth. And so subsequently, we had to have a ton of helmets mic'd all the time because you couldn't just put a mic in a helmet. It was like a 15-minute process, like seriously. So we had to have a zillion of them with mics in it because they started replacing helmets that were sort of like our hero helmets with like stunt ones or extras because we started breaking them all in this fight sequence. So.
Wow. So what are your when you have like let's say an action scene or more, there's lots of stunts, but there's still little bits of dialogue. What's your kind of take on that? And not just for Interstellar, for instance, but maybe also in like Fast and Furious when there's cars going left, right, and center. Right. How do you kind of manage stunts?
I mean, for the most part, everybody's aware of the bits of dialogue, and we make sure that we cover those clean at some point. Some shots, it's like, okay, well, you've got to see all this stuff going on in the background. It's going to murder the dialogue. We get that, but we're going to do a special close-up just for the dialogue without, 700 engines running, all that kind of stuff. And Fast and Furious was, I didn't know what to expect going into it, but it was actually an extremely pleasant experience. Like the crew was fantastic. The DP was one of the nicest people I've ever worked with. And I really liked the director. We had like super cooperation. So whenever we had any kind of issue, we would bring it to them and explain it, and they'd say, okay, well, and we'd all sit down and work it out together. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to get it in this angle because this angle is all about, whatever, the car, the burnout behind with the tire on fire and all that, But, we'll get it over here where we don't see that, and we'll make sure everything's turned off for that. And so we did. We covered ourselves, and it's fine.
And how does that process kind of come about? Is it just something that kind of naturally forms on set, that every time it's like, right, we're moving on to this shot? Do you then do a kind of little checklist of maybe what you've done before in pre-production, just flagging up stuff, and then bring it up again? Or just talk us through how that kind of comes about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more sort of on the day. You block the scene, you know what's happening, and then you say, and then as you just look at it, you say, okay, well, clearly we're not going to get good sound on these shots, but we need to make sure that we either have a different shot or we get a wild line, and then that's something that you bring to the first AD and the director, and you say, so how are we going to do this? And then we all discuss it and we say, okay. And so then you're comfortable when they're trashing it because we're going to cover it, and if for some reason they forget or don't cover it, you say, hey, wait, what about the shot, the sound thing? And they go, oh, right, okay, guys, hold on, we got to do one more for sound, whatever. So, but it's kind of I feel like it's more of a daily thing, and you do have conversations in pre-production, but they're more about larger issues like, we're going to build this thing, and how can we build it so that it doesn't mess you up, or You know, is there, like, if you look at the set, is there a wall that you think if we made it a wild wall, it would be really helpful to you or whatever? That's more like pre-production stuff. But then those specific shots for the dialogue or whatever, that seems like more of an on-the-day kind of thing.
Yeah, fantastic. And then how do kind of wild lines and kind of room tone, how do you go about doing that? Are you doing it after every scene? Are you doing it just as and when? Are you getting safety stuff just as you need it, or just talk us through kind of wild lines and room tone?
Okay. I mean, I find that more and more I'm not really getting room tone. I mean, I listen to a scene if there's a quiet chunk of the scene where I feel like they pull the tone out of. I'm like, okay, well, they'll be able to get it there. They don't need it. I know that overall, people don't appreciate it when you ask for it. A lot of times, they're like, oh, come on, are you serious? You're going to do room tone now? But there are times where you really need it. I mean, sometimes you're in a room and it's got a very specific sound and you don't like it, especially when you don't like it. Then I'm like, I want to get room tone here so they know what to get rid of. Because they can, now they have, you know, with like isotope and stuff like that, they can take that sound and just say, take this sound out. So if I find the room tone is offensive, I will. Or if I have a scene where it's very clear that when I shoot in one direction it sounds like something, and when I shoot in another direction it sounds like something entirely different, then I know between every cut it's going to be, you're going to hear it go, come and go, come and go. So they need some of that noisy side to layer over the quiet side to smooth it all out. So then I'll ask for it. But if it's just quiet and I feel like there's quiet chunks within the scene, I don't usually ask for room tone. And I also think if you don't ask for things that often, that when you do ask for something, people are like, oh, he's asking for room tone, let's give it to him. I mean, never ask for it. But if you ask for it after every single thing, they start to get like, all right, he wants room tone again. So it's like that. Yeah. That's a very important thing, I think, in being a sound person is to, well, it's to pick your battles a little bit, but also just to know, like, when it's good to say, when it's good to ask for things and when it's good not to ask for things, you know. And I mean, certain scenes where, you know, sometimes things get very emotional and, like, you don't want to ask for a wild line or something when, you know, when the actors are really wound up and stuff, or whatever, you know, whatever what I'm saying. It's just, so you have to sort of feel it out. Sometimes you know, yeah, today's not the day to ask for that. And then other days, it's fine, yeah, sure, let's do it. Or you can even say, you know, I really like to tell the director, I'd like to get wild lines for this scene, but I don't think this is the right time to do it. I know we have 17 pages to do today, but what about, like, on Thursday, maybe we could bring that actor back because it looks like a very light day. And the director will go, yeah, that's a good idea, yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so presenting just solutions straight away as opposed to just constantly being the problem of...
Right. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. It's like, you want to have a solution, not just a complaint. Like, you're like, this is not working, but how about if we did that, you know? Yeah. But of course, anyway, with wild lines, it's better to do them immediately after the scene because that's when the actors are most likely to be able to sort of imitate what they had done. But, whatever. And I do like wild lines. I mean, there's numerous times where I've gotten wild lines that are in the movie, and it's like, you know, I'll even have a scene where I really like the way pretty much everything sounds, except there's one line somebody bends over and they say it to their shoes, and I just think it sounds terrible. So I'm like, why don't we just give me a couple of those lines, and it'll drop right in. It's pretty much on their back when they bend down, and it'll be smooth, and, you know, there's I know a specific incident of that in Benjamin Button where it worked out great. So, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of, like, relationships with dialogue editors, how have you gone about that? Like, for instance, knowing like what you're listening to and how much can potentially be taken out, for instance, or how much kind of safety you have. Do you have any relationships with dialogue editors after you shoot? Because I know you go to the mix, but I just wondered if you had.
Right. No, I do. I actually start relationships with them very early on in production, if not in pre-production, and I just, you know, I always talk to them and I sort of discuss how I normally deliver my tracks, like, you know, how I set up. What I always do is I put a mono mix on channel 1, like a dailies mix on channel 1, and then ISOs of everything that was used to make that mix on channels 2 through 8 or 2 through 10, and I explain that to them, and that's how I work. And, you know, is that good for them? Some people want a mix on 1 and 2, and then all the ISOs on 3 through 8 or whatever. And, you know, whatever. I mean, we just talk about it. And but I set up something with them, and then very early on, I started talking to them about getting feedback on whether they're happy with what they're getting, and what I can do differently. And a lot of it's about file naming and that kind of junk, because that's certain people have different protocols they like to follow for file naming and that kind of thing. And yeah, and then all the way through the mix, and then I believe it's really important to interact a lot with post-production, and they can really be your allies and help you even get things that, because you can ask sometimes on set like 10 times or something, and you can tell that they've had enough of you asking for it. But then when you say to the editors, let them know we really need this, they get a memo from the office. Editorial wants these lines wild, and you're like, oh really? How great is that? And that's then you get them, and then you're like, fantastic, because it's not you asking anymore, it's somebody else, and that can be very, very helpful sometimes.
Fantastic. So in terms of like everyone, for instance, covering everyone in the scene, are you getting wild lines for even people that are playing just really like incidental parts, or how's that kind of working? And do you even like regret anything that you haven't asked for, or is it kind of just because the decision's been made, it's kind of not really your call anymore, or just how do you feel?
Right. I mean,
No, sorry, go on. I was trying to clarify myself.
There's a little bit of a delay. It's a little hard. I mean, there's definitely not so much regrets, but there's definitely like things that you do that you feel are not right, but you do them because that's the way you're being asked to do them, or that's how the production goes. Or I mean, there's numerous times where I'll be on set trying to lobby for a certain thing and I don't get it, and then I'm like, that's so sad that we didn't do that, because it would have been so much better if we did. But that's how they chose. They chose to shoot the 2 cameras wide and tight. They chose to, that's a big issue for sound guys on set when they shoot multiple cameras. They'll shoot a wide shot and a tight shot at the same time, and we can't really mic that properly. You can mic the wide shot for the wide perspective, but the tight shot, it's not going to sound right off a mic for the wide perspective. So the only option to get that to make it better than the wide sound is to put a lavalier on somebody or plant a microphone close to them. And it's a compromise. It's a compromise compared to if you were shooting that shot alone. You could have the mic right over their head and it would sound great. And a lot of times these are like, what I'll try to do is suggest 2 shots that work together. Like we're doing a wide shot, and there's one guy standing who's very tall at the top of the frame. So do a close-up on that guy, and he's going to sound pretty good, because it'll pretty much, the mic will be in the right shot for him. If you do it on the little girl sitting down at the bottom, 18 feet away from the boom mic, it's going to sound terrible. And so sometimes I can talk them into doing that. I'll say, so that way you get your 2 shots, but it works for both of us. And then other times I lose, and I end up putting a radio mic on the girl that's sitting on the ground or whatever it is. And I don't really like that sound because it doesn't cut so nicely with the boom, but that's what it has to be, because that's the way they chose to do it. So it's not so much regrets, it's more like that frustration of like, gosh, why couldn't they have just done it, in a more intelligent fashion, and then, or why couldn't they just listen to me? It would sound so much better, but they made the choice, and what can I do about it? Yeah. And, certain directors, certain productions are more prone to that or less prone to that, and I think most of the better filmmakers are really aware that they don't want to compromise the sound. And so when you bring these issues to them, they respond immediately. I remember the second day I worked with David Fincher on Benjamin Button. He was doing this close-up on the guy that's giving a speech in a railroad station about the clock running backwards. And he was also shooting the entire railroad station in this gigantic wide shot. I didn't really know him yet, so I just said to him, after we do a few of these, if you just give me like the close-up only, I can make it sound much better. And he said, well, where do you want to put the mic? And I said, well, the boom guy was above. I said, bring it in. So he brought like the entire boom pole, the microphone, everything was across the whole wide shot. And Fincher goes, yeah, that's fine. I'll just paint it out. I was like, wow. Oh, okay. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. And from then on, I realized that, I would just go to him with any kind of issue I had, and he would help me solve it, either by painting it out, or in certain instances, he'd say, no, I don't want to paint anything here, so we'll just do these 2 shots separately. But he always worked with me to make a solution, no matter what was going on.
Fantastic. And in terms of like using lavaliers, obviously boom is your main choice all the time, but are you always radio micing everyone anyway, just for, I don't know, safety, backup, if they talk to their shoes?
Right, right. No, I don't really subscribe to that. I kind of radio mic people when I think it's necessary, or when I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, okay, we don't know what's happening here. This whole scene's ad-lib. We don't know how we're going to shoot it. It's handheld. It's crazy. Maybe we'll put radios on people as a safety, but mostly I try to just put radios on people when I think they're going to be needed. And we know we're shooting something in the foreground. These guys have some lines way back there as they cross through the room. Obviously, those need to come off wires because second boom can't reach it or whatever. So we'll wire up those guys back there. But I tend to just only use radios when I think they're needed. I don't use them just because I don't know what, let's just put one on everybody. Because the actors quickly get really sick of that. Now, I don't know how they feel about that in England, but in America they're very, I know that at least traditionally the British, like in television, they used to use a lot of lavaliers and stuff. I've had British people tell me they don't like the way our movies sound because they prefer that radio mic sound. I'm like, well, whatever. That's an aesthetic choice that I don't, I'm obviously feel the opposite, but I don't like to wire people unless I have to. And there's certain actors that you really don't want to wire unless you have to, because they don't want to be wired. Yeah. So you have to. They might even make you sort of prove your point as to why you have to do it. But then there's certain other ones that just couldn't care less. It's like, yeah, put a wire on me, I don't care. So sometimes that also that's maybe involved in the choice. It's like if you're not sure and the person is very easy to get along with, you're like, sure, let's put a wire on him, he's easy. And if you're not sure and the person's really difficult, you're like, let's not bother him unless we really need to. So, And I do know, when I was doing Fast 7, the sound editor, a sound editor who I'd never met, came on set one day and just said, is everybody wired for this thing we were doing? And I said, no. And she was like, don't you wire everybody all the time? And I said, no. And she said, what? And I said, when it's appropriate. And she said, but you should wire everybody all the time. I said, are you happy with the sound you think? Oh yeah, the sound's great. I go, okay, then the conversation's over. That's it. You're happy with what you're getting. We're getting it whatever way you're getting it. And some directors I think are very, like Chris Nolan, everything had to be boomed. He needed to see the boom. I mean. It needed to be in the room all the time. Really, he honestly needed to see it. He even admitted that. It's like, I need to see it. It's like, okay, it'll be there. And that's great for me because that is my aesthetic, is to have a boom over somebody's head all the time anyway. So it was, I had a director who supported that. And and Fincher, I think he really wanted the sound to sound great. He didn't care how I was getting it to sound great, but he wanted it to sound great, and if it wasn't sounding great, he wanted me to tell him why and what we could do to improve it. But he always supported me getting really good sound, but I don't think he really cared if it came off the wire or boom mic. He was like, whatever, as long as it sounds good,
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, fantastic.
Yeah.
And can you talk us through about having two boom operators and kind of the advantages and also kind of the communication aspects while they're kind of both doing it, and how they figure out who's going where, what, why.
Right. I mean, I almost always work with two booms for years. I love to do that. And I think the biggest advantage to that is if you do have overlapping dialogue, you're recording both sides of the dialogue. So it can be used, so the editors can cut it together. Because if you have overlapping dialogue and you have a person on screen talking and the off-mic person overlaps them, now the on-screen dialogue is becoming unusable because it's stuck to this bad unmic'd off-screen dialogue. So I always mic off-screen as much as possible, and I discuss overlaps with the director, whether the director wants to control them or let them go, or how, because some people are very specific and they want all the on-camera dialogue to be clean, and they go crazy controlling the off-camera, which is great. And other people are like, no, I think the overlaps really keep the energy going, and I want to have it happening all the time. So, and with those people, we always mic it, and then if for some reason we can't effectively mic the off-screen, for whatever reason. You know, a lot of times it's because they're standing next to something really noisy, or there's like a million light stands and you just can't follow them around or whatever. You know, and then in those moments we'll be like, you know what, we can't effectively mic the off screen here. This is where we should really control the overlaps. And then, you know, they do because they understand. But 90% of the time I mic both sides. And I just can't stand going to dailies and seeing a guy on camera say 2 words and then somebody off camera have 3 pages of dialogue that you can't hear because it's all off mic. So personally, I just want to hear everything. And I always mix so that the on camera is fatter than the off. So I have the boom guys mic the off camera guy a little further away, and I mix it a little lower in the mix so that it doesn't sound off mic, but it sounds a little bit not as present as the person on mic. That's, I think, important.
And then
aesthetically.
How does your sound mix that you do on the day kind of transition into post-production? Are they using it? Is it just a guide? Is it for the director to hear? Could you just that's just one of the questions.
I mean, I think that they use my mix to cut with, and they get very. Some people get very attached to it, and they want the final film to sound like my mix because that's what they've been listening to when they've been cutting for the last 4 months. And other people are like, yeah, well, that's just temp, and we'll just tear it apart, and we'll remanipulate it all later, like whatever. I mean, but I try to mix so that so what I would like it to sound like, in the picture, and I try to mix for the cuts so that it'll cut together without them having to make too many adjustments and the Avid to they have to raise and lower constantly. I try to make. I like perspective. I like wide shots to sound wider and tight shots to sound tighter, and it's different. I just try to mix so that, and it's like sometimes it's hard to figure out because it's sort of there's a dynamic range within a scene, and you have to try to mix so that you're covering all the ranges. But of course, you want to bring up the low stuff so people can hear it, and pull down the loud stuff so it's not overwhelming. So you have to kind of balance it, and within the cuts, it can be difficult to do that. But sometimes you sort of have to start at the top with, okay, this is the loudest the scene gets, so I got to sort of back everything down so that I don't overdrive that, and then I put everything else in. It's like, who knows? But,
sending you gain structure and stuff. Fantastic, yeah. And then can you talk us through, because obviously you've done House of Cards and TV as well, could you just talk us through kind of the sort of faster-paced nature of TV?
Right. I mean, it was like, I came into House of Cards because of David Fincher. I had done 3 movies with him, and he was going to do this. He directed the first 2 episodes of House of Cards, and he was sort of the overall showrunner of the thing. And Fincher asked me to. We've been working on getting a Slate List system happening for the cameras. We started on Benjamin Button. We actually were able to do it because we had a recorder that was not on the camera, and it captured the image on a separate recorder. And in that separate recorder, I could feed an AES audio. So I sent it. Oh, my Mac's saying low battery. Hold on one sec.
Oh, yep. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
Let's have an interlude and play some.
Let's see. Okay, it's charging up now. Right. So anyway, we had this single recorder that recorded the image as well as the audio. So we were able to do a Slate List system because there was the person who operated the recorder who could type in the metadata for the scene number and stuff, and I would send my metadata for my audio. So you didn't need to have sticks at all because the machine knew this is take 5, this is take 6, etc. Then when we went to Social Network, we started with the Red cameras, and we had a lot of timecode issues with the early Reds in terms of keeping sync. So we had a really hard time because Fincher wanted to go Slateless, and we worked really hard on that. And then when we did Dragon Tattoo, we got the new Reds, which were at the time Scarlet or something. I forget which generation it was. Epics. I think it was the Epic. And they had, and I worked a lot with the Red people to try and work out all our timecode bugs, but we're still having problems, which I actually now in retrospect believe might have been a problem with some of the Diva software, the timecode software in the Diva, because we had an update that seemed to fix it. But meanwhile, we were trying to fix it because we thought it was a red problem, because originally it was a red problem.
Yeah.
So anyway, then when we got to House of Cards, Fincher was like, I really don't want to have any slates. You know, we've got to move really fast on this thing, so we've got to work it out. So I went down to Red for a couple of weeks, like every few days for a couple of weeks to try and work out all these timecode issues. And we finally solved it, and we had it working great. So we had no slates at all in House of Cards, which enabled us to run that much faster because we didn't have to ever slate anything, which is nice. And I would just enter my metadata on my recorder, which I can actually do. Like when I'm recording, I can go into the take I'm currently recording. I can change the metadata. So if we've gone from, in America we do, like, let's say we're shooting scene 15, the next setup will be called 15A, a different setup we call 15B, so we do like 5 takes to 15A, and then we move on to 15B, take 1. I can change all that information in my recorder while I'm recording, so I can always make sure that the metadata is always correct for whatever it is that we're shooting. So, and then we made Red and I made the system so we could merge my data onto the picture. So when you put in my audio, it sunk up all the audio, but it also brought all the metadata over. So any clip that you looked at, you could tell the exact scene and take number. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, I watched it. It'll take like a whole half a day's work, and do it in like 2 minutes. I'll have it entirely sunk, everything playable. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's Red software. It's part of their gallery of software that you have when you have a Red camera. It's one of their, I don't know what it's called, but it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, fantastic.
And so as long as it's fine for
possible. Sorry, I didn't even realize. Yeah, that sounds so fantastic. Sorry, go on.
It's amazing. As long as the timecode matches on the audio and the film, or the video, it'll just take it all in like that. It's like insane.
Amazing.
What recorder do you use?
I'm using 664 at the moment because it's kind of
the what?
The sound device is 664, so it's kind of
the 664.
Yeah, so it's kind of more field mixer because I also do corporate type stuff as well.
And that
quite good all round.
And that puts the files onto a CF card?
It does both CF and SD at the same time. So I can have a backup, and I can choose different options as to what's kind of going where. So I could do, say, for instance, just MP3 to 1 for, say, transcription, and then full broadcast wave, or I could just do ISOs on one and mix and ISOs on the other. So it's pretty good that way. How about you? What are you doing in terms of like backing up and making sure all the stuff's kind of there?
Well, the Diva has an internal hard drive, the ones I'm using. So they have the internal hard drive, which is kind of like the master. And then I output CF cards to give to Post. And then I either will make copies of the CF cards and put them into an external hard drive, or I'll plug an external hard drive into the Diva and export all the material onto it, depending on what I'm doing. It took them a long time, but now they can export data while it's recording, and it can do separate. Like it used to be, you could only export or with the folder that you're actually currently recording in, but now you can go back and you can do, like, while you're recording today's work, you could export the previous 2 weeks of work or something. It's fine. You can just, yeah, it's great. I know, like, the sound devices are great because you could just plug them into your computer and see the recorder as an external drive and just drag, which is, unfortunately, you can't do that in Diva. That's fantastic. I wish you could.
Yeah, no, it's super. And in terms of, so you're on location. Let's say the room isn't quite treating you nicely. Let's say, what type of things are you using? Are you using sound blankets quite a lot? I know in TV, obviously, it's faster paced and it's probably set builds and stuff.
Right.
Through sort of just trying to treat rooms, and when you treat rooms and how much by. And
I mean, I'm somewhat obsessed with footsteps and shoe noise, and so I do a lot of work putting down carpets, which help kill some of the echo in an echoey room. I put a lot of carpets down, like carpet runners that have rubber backing so people don't trip, and we tape all the carpets down. And then I put a lot of shoe foam on people's feet and stuff like that to try I really have a thing about footsteps, and I'm very obsessed about that. Uh, and and then I do use Fernie pads when, like, if you have just like a big wall that's really reflective sounding, that's off camera, that you can just cover the whole wall with Fernie pads and just make it to dull it. But it depends. It really depends. My personal feeling is that if you're shooting in a room that looks like a great big room and it sounds like a great big room, that's okay. But if you're shooting in a little tiny corner of a great big room and that corner looks like an intimate thing and it sounds like a giant place, then you've really got to box in that corner and make it sound smaller. So it's kind of what's appropriate to the frame. I don't mind if a big echo room sounds big and echoey if it looks big and echoey. Shooting in a church, it sounds kind of churchy. But if it's a small, but if you put somebody's office in the corner of a church and you don't see that there's 200 feet behind them of open space, then, we should probably fix that.
So you're always still just mastering still just working everything out perspective-wise again.
Yeah, and for the frame, for what we're going to see, and then. But yeah, I'd say most of the sound work I do is with carpets. And I do have sonics and panels like that and stuff, but I don't use them that often, I mean, I always find that you put them up and then right before you shoot, somebody wants to put a light, like right where your sonics is, and then it comes down anyway. And it's kind of like, okay, why don't we try? But there's certainly certain situations where, I mean, definitely like a terrible bathroom or something where you don't see the ceiling, you might put a couple of sheets of sonics up there and stuff. I have them mounted to foam core, and you can just kind of stick them up pretty easily. But even so, I really find less and less I use any of that stuff, mostly just like carpets and Fernie pads and stuff. Yeah. And then, also like when you have a scene with glass, like a lot of dishes and what do you call that stuff? Like flatware, like forks, knives, glasses, cups. Sometimes you put a lot of stuff on the bottom of all of them to quiet them down as they put them down. But there's some issues with that because sometimes you can see it on camera when they lift the cup up and you see the stuff in it, so they have to take all that stuff.
Well, they pull on.
And of course,
with them.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always like somebody will. Sometimes when people walk across a room, something's jiggling on a table or something, and so you got to kind of walk around and listen for that, and there's always a computer with the fan idling, and just all kinds of stuff that you run around just try to turn off everything you can. We were doing this scene in the bedroom of this house. I was saying to my boom operator, "Is there a refrigerator in there?" And he goes, "No, there's no refrigerator in here. It's a bedroom." And I go, "Well, I swear, I hear there's a refrigerator." And it's like looking around and pointing around. And I said, "Well, every time you point at one, it was in this movie Mordecai with the Johnny Depp movie that's coming out, and I was saying, every time I point that one way, I swear to a refrigerator." And he goes, "There's no refrigerator." And I went in there and I opened up the closets, the clothes closet, and for some reason there was a refrigerator in the clothes closet. I'm like, "See, there is a refrigerator." We turned it off, and then but I was just like, I mean, I agree with him. I'm like, why would there be a refrigerator in there? But there was. I don't know. Maybe it was somebody's house. Maybe they were, needed their insulin cooled down. So I don't know, but it was like, well, they probably died because we forgot to turn the refrigerator back on. No, I hope that's not the case.
Yeah. So was that. And
that's like.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Continue. No, go on. Sorry. Thanks.
Okay. No, and that's a big thing. It's like we do turn refrigerators off a lot, and it's like really important to remember to turn them back on. And one of the tricks somebody taught me a long time ago is you leave your car keys in the refrigerator, and then when you go to drive home, you're like, "Oh wait, where are my keys? Oh, the refrigerator." And then you go back and you turn the refrigerator back on. I have to say, it's a really good trick. I recommend it.
That's definitely what I do as well. Yeah, definitely.
Do you? It's really good, right?
Yeah. It works every single time. You're like, oh. No.
The car might not unlock because the clicker might be cold, but.
Yeah. As long as you can still get in, it still works. But just coming on to the vehicles actually, and just kind of plant microphones in general. What are your kind of thoughts on? I mean, rigging vehicles. You're probably straight under the sun visor type scenario.
Yeah. yeah, I am of two minds about it because a lot of times I'm not happy with how it sounds when we plant mics in cars. I mean, I've had some really good luck at times just putting a desk stand in between the two seats playing up. It
Okay.
depends on the car, of course. I've done a lot of visor stuff with Chef's PLMs, which are those little round kind of flat mics, like a PZM type of mic. And then I have two of those. Sometimes I put one over each visor. Then I sometimes take a Chef's on a GVC, which is the angle. Yeah, and I'll point that. I'll stick it in the visor and point it at them. But often I'll just put wires on people in cars. And depending on the seatbelt situation, I just find a lot of times it ends up sounding the best. And a lot of times in those situations, I will wire them and I will plant mics, and I'll have like multiple options.
Yeah.
And then and then we'll get in the car, I'll listen to everything, I'll say, yeah, you know what, it turned out the wires sounded the best, or it turned out the mic in the visor was the winner, you know, whatever. I mean, there's always the one gray area I always find in car stuff is the leaning in and out of the window thing. Because, you know, people come up and they talk to the car, and they're outside of the car. But then they'll lean in, and they're kind of half in and half out, and they don't really play anymore on the outside mic, but they don't really play on the inside mic, and so I always find that to be like kind of a difficult situation where you have to hopefully get a couple of takes to listen to audition all the different mics and decide. When he leans in, it sounds best on the mic that's in the visor, or, you know, or the outside mic actually still sounds good, or whatever it is, because it's not. It's always something that you're not really sure.
And are you not finding that when you, for instance, mic someone, if they just turn 90 degrees, that they're sounding a bit off? And then is that when you play the other one straight down the middle? Is that how you're doing that?
Yeah. No, I do find that. You know, it's really a case also if the windows are closed or open in the car, it makes a huge difference. I mean, of course, if they're closed, they sound so much better. And if they're closed and they look to the left or the right, a lot of times they get a reflection off the window, so it still sounds okay. If the window's open, there's nothing to reflect off of, and it goes really off. But yes, I do. I find that with radios in general, if people turn their heads too far, they just go off, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, but a lot of times with cars, especially if the windows are open, there's so much road noise, so much wind noise. It's like, you know, I don't know. Yeah. Cars are not ideal situations.
No, not good.
Not my favorite thing.
And in terms of just anywhere else, are you using? Do you ever feel the need to use a plant mic in another scene, or because you have kind of two boom ops and just scheduled coverage, you can kind of just cover everything without needing to?
Oh no, definitely plant mics, and I mean, I do scenes with many mics, but you know, they'll be like, I mean, the way we work it out, my boom operators and I, is we all watch the rehearsals together, and we're like, okay, so the bulk of it takes place over here, and one mic can cover that, and then there's the person walks from over here to over there, and you can cover that, but then when he goes to the sink or something, that it's no man's land. So then we'll put a plant mic up for that, or put the guy on a wire for it, or whatever it takes. But yeah, we figure it out, and sometimes there'll be multiple. So when he's over there, he's on that plant mic, or when he's over there looking to the left, he's on that one. When he's over looking to the right, he's on a different one. And so, yeah, we use lots of plant mics. And like I said, I'm a big proponent of the Chefs, the CMC series. I have tons of them, so I'll just put them everywhere. You know, just.
Fantastic. Yeah. And are you doing? Sorry.
No, go ahead. You do.
It was just about are you using them kind of just wireless kind of plugs on the back most of the time for kind of the booms, keeping them all wireless, or are you keeping as many wired as possible?
Well, like on Interstellar, it was all wired. Chris wanted everything plugged in. It was so funny because I worked with Fincher for like 4 years, and he wanted everything wireless. I don't want to see any cables. Everything should be wireless. So it was all wireless, wireless mic, you know. And I got totally dialed into that, and I was all set up to do that. And then Nolan's like, "Why aren't you guys cabled up?" And it's like, "Oh, do you want us to cable up? Okay." So we everything was cabled on Interstellar, which, you know, I personally think sounds the best. But I had also, I mean, the wires, the wireless mics have. The quality's gotten so much better now that, you know, you really, it's. I personally even have a hard time telling. There's certain moments, like if people start screaming and stuff, you can hear the wires start to compress and stuff. But in normal level dialogue, I mean, there's very little noise in the wireless, and the frequency response is great, and I mean, it pretty much sounds the same. Almost sounds identical to. But I still think DBAS is putting on the cable without question. So that's what we did on Interstellar. It was completely cabled booms the whole time, and then we had some planted mics, and we did have people wired a couple of times, but that was usually without Mr. Nolan's knowledge, because he would not accept that we were doing people on wires. And, but there's certain scenes that come off the wires that sound great, and I mean, I don't know how he thinks we mic that, but it's really good.
It's probably better if he doesn't know. Yeah, it's probably fine. Well, I'm conscious that we're kind of up to our kind of hour mark, so I just want to kind of hand it over to you for just any kind of final kind of, I guess, advice in a way. I don't know, any final words just to kind of, I don't know, sum up, motivate everyone. Woo! Any thoughts? Over to you.
Motivate everybody. I don't know. I mean, I think just, I mean, I love doing sound for movies. I love hearing my sound in movies. I love watching movies and having them sound good and hearing them, other people's movies. And I think if if you love what you do, that's really important, and people get a sense of that, and you're not just, and I think, I mean, for me, one of the things I always do, like somewhat consciously, but I always make sure to say positive things about the sound every once in a while. Because I know a lot of sound people just feel like they complain all the time. But sometimes I'll just say, hey, that scene sounded great. I thought there was going to be a big problem with that thing, but it turned out that it sounded fine. And that, like, just even that every once in a while, not every day, or but just to make sure that people realize that there's kind of a positive side to what we do as well. It's not just that we complain all the time about everything.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, just thank you very much, Mark. I'm sure I'll try and have you on again in the not too distant future, because again, we could just go on forever, and I just want to download your brain onto here, which is fantastic. But I want to also just thank everyone that's been watching as well, and all the comments that have come in. This is really cool. Don't forget to subscribe for more future things as they just randomly appear from the ether, and we'll get some more conversations going. So I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll let Mark say goodbye as well.
All right, goodbye, everybody. Nice meeting everybody.
Cool. And I'll catch you guys on the other side.